Hello, hope you're doing well. Welcome back to the Weapons of War podcast, and as usual, I'm your host, Eden Chirande. We are tackling the subject matter that we addressed previously, and that's the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act 2026 that was signed into law in Uganda on 29 April 2026. Just a recap. The purpose of the act, it is to regulate the efficient and rational use of energy in Uganda, enhance and promote energy efficiency and conservation in Uganda, avoid wasteful use of energy, and ease the burden of energy costs on the economy and the environment. The sectors that are to be affected or that were hinted on in this act were the cooking technologies, that's the technologies that we use in our cooking, gas, firewood, charcoal, etc. And then they also looked at the transport sector. The Act seeks to promote energy efficiency, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and enhance sustainable transportation practices in the transport sector. Particularly in the public sector, the minister will provide incentives to provide to the private sector to invest in public transportation infrastructure, such as buses and trains, in order to provide citizens with convenient and energy efficient alternatives to private vehicles. And also touching there will be, again, the support to public sector will also include investment in electric vehicles, like the Kira Motors have just done with the launch of electric buses in Kampala, and I think also firstly in the Eastern. Then the other aspect to look at is the fuel and vehicular emissions. Fuel, of course, that's the fuel economy that they are looking at. Vehicular emissions, we talked about, these are emissions that come from cars or vehicles. A person shall not import into or sell a motor vehicle, trailer, or engineering plant in Uganda unless the motor vehicle, trailer, or engineering plant complies with the fuel economy standards. So there will be fuel economy standards issued by the Uganda National Bureau of Standards in consultation with the minister. There will be fuel economy standard that a machine or car should be able to consume to a certain level, because we are trying to be energy efficient. Those that consume loads of energy will be locked out of the country. I explained that further in the previous episode. You can check it out on this very platform you're watching this. Throughout the period that the motor vehicle is displayed for sale, the motor vehicle bears a label of fuel economy and vehicular emissions. Same applies to any printed promotional material or advertisement. That all the time, if you have this car, say, in the bond, or you have this generator you're trying to sell, it has to have labels of how it showing or indicating how fuel efficient it is and the emissions expected from that vehicle when it's in a full operation, so that if a person is coming to buy, they know their contribution to this climate change. There will be those labels that this vehicle you're buying emits this much, and therefore those vehicles that emit so much perhaps will not be allowed into this country as we lean more towards electric vehicles or energy efficient vehicles. The likes of petrol and diesel cars or machines could be phased out. And then there's also the buildings. Buildings will also be affected by this Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act. Okay, by buildings, firstly, we look at schools, factories, hotels, apartments. It is even your own home. The minister shall issue a certificate of energy efficiency to the owner of a building, which is compliant with energy efficient standards. So even buildings, how will it be affected? Say if you're a factory, the machines you'll be bringing in. If you're an apartment, the appliances that you'll be putting in, the ACs, the refrigerators, the washing machine, how are they energy efficient? Okay, so even how is the energy the building uses? Should the building be using more of solar, wind, or you're powering it with with an energy that emits a lot of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere? So also the other sector to be affected is agriculture. Agriculture, the machinery and the equipment, especially including tractors, irrigation systems, and any other relevant tools. Those those systems, all those machinery that are being used for agriculture, the tractors and all, they have to be energy efficient. Then there's appliances. Appliances here also refers to machinery, not just domestic appliances, the TVs and microwaves and all, but also machinery used in factories. That how energy efficient are these appliances that are being brought into the country. So those are some of the sectors that are, as will be affected by this act. And this will promote and encourage energy efficient technologies, reduce energy consumption, and practices and systems to reduce greenhouse emissions. And then also an aspect to look at there is that there will be, of course, to effect this act, there has to be energy audits. A designated energy consumer shall undertake energy audits to identify areas where energy is used inefficiently and where energy saving measures can be implemented. And what will be the transition period from the time this act takes effect? Because there will be a period where perhaps people in the bonds and maybe people with buildings, people with schools, with their factories, um, the farmers will have to transition or to adhere to ensure that their works or their businesses adhere to the requirements, to the energy efficient measures as laid out by the Act. So what will be that transition period that they'll be given to phase out some of the machines or appliances they're using to bring in other appliances that adhere to this Act? According to the Act, notwithstanding any provision of this Act, any person using specified energy consuming technology before the commencement of this Act shall, within 1 year from the date of commencement of this Act, ensure that the energy consuming technology complies with the Act. So that's what we're told from that Act. But again, like stated previously, this is an energy transition. It's not just it puts here and there. This is an energy transition. Energy transition from the traditional sources of energy that we've been used to the renewables. You've heard that, to the cleaner energies. So this is a movement towards a certain goal. It's not merely tweak this, tweak that, just fine tune something. No, it's a transition. And this was laid out by UN when they said that fossil fuel phase out is a precondition for the emergence of economic models that align with the right to a health environment. So there are economic models that have to be implemented if we are going to have a healthier environment. And for those economic models to come into play, there has to be the phase out of fossil fuels. Why? Because 99% of all this breathing is at unsafe levels due to air pollution from sources such as burning fossil fuels. That fossil fuels are responsible for a lot of bad things happening around, especially air pollution being one of them. Then two, they are also, because of emissions from fossil fuels, they are also highly responsible for the climate change. Therefore, we need to get rid of fossil fuels. So this is what it's all about. It's a transition from the use of fossil fuels or traditional sources of energy to the renewables that have been termed as cleaner energies or green energy. Again, what is the goal then? The goal is to reach net zero by 2050. What is net zero? Net zero is a concept that was coined that to see that by 2050, globally speaking, every country everywhere, that the amount of greenhouse emissions we emit equals to the amount of greenhouse gases removed from the atmosphere. Therefore, if the amount of greenhouse gases, all this carbon dioxide, we release into the atmosphere through various activities, factories, they say even agriculture, through the vehicles we drive, all that amount of greenhouse gases and fumes that we release in the atmosphere, that there has to be corresponding measures to remove those gases from the atmosphere in order to reach net zero, that the same level we emit, we remove from the atmosphere. And therefore, that's what's called net zero. We hope, or they hope, that reach that place by 2050. But to reach that place, there has to be drastic changes in our lifestyle. And they have started with, or one of the areas that they have started with, or that is being touched, is energy. And that is transiting us from the fossil fuels into the renewables. But like we looked at the case study of Germany, because I don't want us to take these things at first value that because some experts or think tanks have said, therefore, because majority are saying, therefore it's good. Because you and have said, therefore it's good. Is it good? No, we can only consider wisdom to be wisdom or to be good by its results. So where have these energy transitions been applied and what have been the results there? Now that shouldn't matter, or the results there should not pay any heed to who is saying what. Or no, the results should speak for themselves. So we looked at a case study of Germany. Germany had a target of reaching net zero by 2045. It, ha- it has set interim targets of cutting emissions by at least 65% by 2030 and 88% by 2040. And therefore, it looks to be in the negative net emissions by 2050. So, with those kind of goals of hitting this goal of net zero by 2045, what have they set out to do? What have they done about it? We see that their former Chancellor, Angela Merkel, ordered the destruction of 17 nuclear power plants, which powered 30% of Germany's electricity. Yes, the nuclear power plants, they're done away with. In favor of what? In favor of renewables, because also the nuclear power plants were not considered clean enough. So Germany shut down its last nuclear plant in 2023. The decision removed 40 gigawatts of reliable low-cost electricity. So what were the consequences? That's what we want to look at. Okay, that was the wisdom they applied because they wanted to go clean energy or to go green energy. They preferred renewables. But what were the consequences? That should be the lesson. Those should be the lesson that we pick. The consequences. Europe's biggest economy has been in a recession for the past 2 years. How? Why? Electricity prices surged. Grid reliability weakened because the renewables could not fill the gap that was left by the 17 nuclear plants that were producing 30% of the country's electricity. The renewables couldn't fill that gap. I think they could only provide about 8%. And then now Germany's electricity costs are the third highest in the world, only behind UK and Japan. This has led to Germany's industrial decline, often described as deindustrialization, a structural breakdown of its long-term economic model. We talked about the rejigging of economic models to do away with economic models that have been relying on fossil fuels to introduce economic models that rely on renewables. But these are the effects. The renewables cannot fill the gap left by the fossil fuels. Yet the fuels have been done away with. This is in Germany. They couldn't fill the gap. So there's low energy being produced, little energy being produced, yet the demand has remained up. Hence, that little energy, there's a scramble for it, leading to higher prices. Of course, they also hint on the fact that since the Ukrainian war started in 2022 between that's Ukraine and Russia, they stopped the importation of the gas from Russia, which was their main supplier of gas. But then you wonder, why did they destroy their own energy sources to rely on imports? What was the logic there? That you destroy your own nuclear, plants so that you can rely on imports, you know. Anyway, between February 2022 and 2026, industrial output dropped in Germany by over 10%, and the country shed a quarter of a million manufacturing jobs. That's 250,000 jobs lost as energy-intensive sectors contracted sharply. Germany's energy-intensive sectors, chemicals, metal, glass, paper, have contracted sharply due to the soaring power and gas costs following the loss of cheap Russian supplies. So And then there have been, of course, some regrets. The Chancellor, Frederick Merz, has now admitted that the shutdown of the nuclear plants was a strategic mistake, calling Germany's energy transition the most expensive in the world. And because Germany is producing energy that is the most expensive in the world, the operation costs of the industries are shooting up, which means that they're producing goods at higher costs. They can't even compete internationally with other countries that have energy costs that are lower. Therefore, their industries are producing goods at lower costs. So the knock-on effect there is Germany has been in a recession for the past 2 years. But that was just a recap of what we talked about last time. Today, we want to look at another case study, just so you may know that Germany is not just one bad example, that the others are thriving. We could touch so many countries that have tried this energy transition and where they have ended up. Some have made even U-turns. Get. But we shall look at UK today. Their goal, the plan is to switch Britain's power system to 95% clean energy by 2030. What are they doing to achieve that? One, the coal plants were shut down. All major commercial coal-fired power plants in the United Kingdom have now been shut down. The final plant was closed on September 30th, 2024. After nearly 60 years of operation, this completed the total phase out of coal-generated electricity after 142 years. Over 170 historical coal power plants operated in the UK at their peak. At the start of the modern phase-out period in 2012, UK's remaining major coal fleet had a combined capacity of 25 gigawatts. All their coal plants were bringing in, by 2012, they are bringing 25 gigawatts. This collective output was vast enough to fulfill 40% of the entire UK's electricity demand at the time in 2012. This made UK, the destruction of all the coal power plants, made UK the first G7 nation to phase out coal power. Okay, what else are they doing to reach their goal of 95% energy or clean energy supply by 2030? What else have they done? They have done away or banned oil drilling. The UK has an active ban on drilling of oil and gas. It was first introduced in November 2019 due to earthquake risks. Yes, they never look, they never, miss out on excuses to destroy a nation. The UK has dropped from 18 refineries in the late 1970s to just 4 operation major oil refineries today. From 18 refineries in 1970s to just 4 today. They have destroyed all the others. Why? We are fighting climate change, and these fossil fuels are the major culprits in terms of emitting these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide especially. So we have to do away with that energy as we combat climate change in favor of the renewables. Agriculture, what have they done? Because we also looked at the Act is also touching agriculture here in Uganda. Agriculture, what has UK done? The UK Climate Change Committee says Britain will need to consume 25% less meat and 20% less dairy, that's milk, by 2040 if we are to hit this net zero. Yes, you also have to participate. Eat 25% less meat and 20% less dairy products by 2040. So change your diet if you are indeed in this fight against climate change. Farmers have to cut cattle by 22% by 2035. By 2035, farmers cut your cattle by 22%, and by 40% by 2050 in order to meet the UK climate targets. So by 2050, Yes, if you're a farmer, you need to have 40% less cows than you have today. And this is not voluntary, this will be enforced. In addition to dietary changes, the Climate Change Committee's roadmap urges households to replace several appliances. Yes, even at home, replace several appliances. You've seen, especially this year, when they're saying no ACs in their homes, that the moment you turn on your AC, yes, they'll come for you. No ACs. It's too hot. Yes, no AC. Change those appliances that you have at home and switch. And also, there's the call to switch to electric vehicles. Yes, if you have a petrol vehicle, sell it or do away with it and buy an electric vehicle. This is in spite the huge upfront costs associated with both measures. That when they are putting out these orders, do they take into consideration that someone has to incur a cost to change their cars? Someone has to incur a cost to change their appliances in their home. Someone has to incur a cost to reduce the cattle on their farms. And we saw that also here in Uganda. That article, I talked about that livestock emissions, where they are talking about livestock emissions here in Uganda. These things are coming here, where if you have your 500 cows or 1,000, like some regions in Uganda do, people really have lots of cattle. They'll come for you that these cows contribute a lot to climate change by fatting and burping. Therefore, we need to get rid of them. You have 1,000, you stay with 200. Kill the others or slaughter them, but stop this breeding to ensure that there's multiplication. Yes, keep less, because the more you keep, the more they contribute to climate change. So it's a push and pull. They go to the farmer, they tell you reduce your cows, and they come to the consumer and they tell the consumer eat less meat. How do they ensure that the consumer eats less meat? They can make sure of that by slapping costs on meat to go high. Or they can do that by slapping taxes on meat. That you're a farmer who has refused, or they can say that you're a farmer who's keeping these so many cows. Beyond the threshold of cows, you pay this much taxes, and those taxes can go on compounding as per the increment in the cattle you keep. If you say you're keeping 50, your taxes are maybe 10 million. If you're keeping 100, your taxes are 30 million. If you're keeping 150, say perhaps your taxes are, you pay taxes of 50 million. That means to keep the cows is more expensive for the farmer. And if the farmer is to bring that meat to the market, the meat will also be expensive for the consumer because of this extra, carbon tax that they have slapped on farming. Anyway, what have been the results in the UK? UK's emissions are under 1% of the global total emissions. Yeah, after the destruction of coal and their refineries, their emissions have dropped below 1% of the global emissions. In comparison to China, China produces about 35% of the global emissions. 35, China is at 35%, UK below 1%. But this has come at what cost for the UK? Let us look at the effects. Skyrocketing energy costs, just like in Germany. The net zero policies have driven UK gas prices 4 times higher than in USA. They have the highest electricity prices in the developed world. Britain's forced transition to unreliable renewables is leaving families and industries paying the price. Let us see the industries. The price paid by UK industries for power is 63% higher than in France. An industry in UK is paying 63% higher than an industry in France, and 27% higher than in Germany, which is also doing badly. Britain is also the second most expensive country in the world for household electricity, with bill payers paying twice as much as those in the US. Household, and we are going green, renewables, energy efficient and conservation act. Yes, this is how the energy is being efficiently used and conserved. It was estimated that the household energy bills were to jump up by £100 by April this year. This prediction was made September last year. So Britain is only behind Germany in terms of the cost of household electricity. They are expensive. So this switch to renewables that these people are doing, transition of energy from fossil fuels to the renewables is costly. Yes, to the household and to the industries and to the entire economies. Of course, these people look for various reasons. No, it's because of the war in Russia that has made gas prices expensive. But why did you destroy your reliable energy sources? Because of climate change and going green. Anyway, electricity costs have been driven up by adding green levies on the bills to fund renewables. So every bill that a person pays, the industries, the household, there's a tax added. But that tax is being added to fund the transition to renewables, to buy more parks, solar panels, and windmills. So to fund these renewables, there's a cost added to you, a cost added to us. Anyway, we look at economic and carbon tax pressures. UK's remaining domestic oil refineries face intense economic and regulatory pressures that industry bodies warn could drive them to extinction. The foreign mining refineries, yes, there's a lot of pressure on them, especially taxes. This is what is being said. Britain's refineries pay up to 400 million pounds. That's $540 million annually in domestic carbon emission levies. That if you're running a refinery, there's a tax or there are levies you have to pay. And so far they are going up to $540 million. Energy for the UK businesses is 5 times higher than in China, 4.5 times higher than in India, 4 times higher than those in the US. Energy for businesses. So if energy is this expensive because of these carbon emission levies and taxes, what do you think it does to the final goods? The final goods are more expensive because the person or the industries are incurring a lot of money, a lot of operational costs to produce these goods and services. Therefore, the final consumer is paying a lot more for these goods and services. Therefore, what happens to the industries? The industries either they produce below capacity or they close shop. That's why they are saying that because of these levies, that because of these carbon emission levies and taxes, many of these refineries are being driven into extinction. The four remaining ones. The soaring power prices are forcing many British factories to close or shift production abroad, exactly what I've been saying, and tens of thousands of industry jobs are disappearing with no immediate replacement, all in the name of fighting climate change by transitioning from our traditional energy sources to the renewables. Competitors in US and Middle East and India face no equivalent carbon pricing, making their imported fuels significantly cheaper. No, Trump calls this a green scam. Therefore, he doesn't slap these carbon levies on his industries. He's a businessman. So for him, he knows if you want to produce, make a conducive atmosphere for the people to produce, especially in terms of taxes. Please waive as much as possible. Keep them at the minimum. Keep them within reasonable, spaces, and don't slap these unnecessary taxes on people under the guise of fighting climate change. What then results from this energy costs is national inflation. What are the critics saying? The industrial, this one a critic I picked up, talking about the deindustrialization of UK. He said the industrial revolution that gave us the modern world started in the Great Britain with coal, steel, and steam power. And now the UK appears to be leading the way to deindustrialization, thanks to no small part to the crippling energy costs. And then he talks about the UK has put itself in a precarious situation because although it does have oil and gas in the North Sea, it has chosen not to exploit it. It is time to get real. Net zero is not real. It is science fiction. That's what one critic says. And then we have the Shadow Minister for Energy here, Claire Coutinho, wrote on April 6, 2026, last year we lost a third of our refineries. She said, this means we head into another global supply shock, less able to make our own petrol, diesel, and jet fuel, and more reliant on imports from abroad. This is likely to cause us real difficulties in weeks and months ahead. Why? The spiraling cost of the little-known carbon tax has been harming British businesses. The carbon tax we talked about of over $540 million slapped on refineries. She continues, some refineries now spend as much on carbon tax as on their own wage bill. And yet, their competitors in the Middle East, the USA and India, do not face this extra cost. And this is not just refineries. Our chemicals, plastics, cement, and ceramics industries are also struggling. We are importing more goods with higher emissions from countries with lower environmental standards, and all in the name of tackling climate change. That's it. These energy transitions drive up energy costs and they cripple everything in the economy, from the industries all the way to the households. And those are the things we want to import here under the guise of energy efficiency and conservation. What is the UK government doing? The UK government has remained adamant. It's not considering exploring oil, in spite of the fact that say there are massive gas field that has just been discovered beneath Lincolnshire, with enough reserves to power Britain for a decade and inject 112 billion pounds into the economy, create tens of thousands of jobs, and slash the country's reliance on foreign energy. But the government is saying no drilling, we are fighting climate change. You see, so what is the energy security? You can't have energy security when you are over relying on imports. We are relying on Russia, and the moment the EU says no, Russia is no longer our friend, then you stop importing gas from Russia. What happens to your own? What happens to your own industry, your own households? That's what we are seeing in the UK: skyrocketing energy prices, and they are slapping these green taxes. These green taxes to fund the transition from traditional energies into the renewables. Those are the effects. And in conclusion, I love this conclusion from one of the critics: net zero emissions by 2050, or all the talk of energy efficiency and conservation means that the government has direct how you drive, what you eat, where you can go, your domestic appliances, how you make power, etc. That's controlling every fiber of your life. That's what this energy transition is all about. It's not just crippling economies, it is another tool of control. What are you doing? They slap taxes on it. How are you driving? They slap taxes on it. What have you bought? You bought meat. Yet cows, are contributing a lot to these greenhouse emissions. They slap taxes on the meat. So you eat less meat. Meanwhile, as they tell you to eat less meat, they are producing lab-grown meats. That those ones you can eat. Because manufacturing meat in a lab at least does not release as many, as much greenhouse gases in the atmosphere as rearing cattle on the farm. Perhaps that's green manufacturing of meat, lab-grown meats. That's what they're encouraging us to eat. But in a nutshell, that's what this Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act is likely to unleash on our economies and households. We've looked at Germany and we've looked at the UK. If these two major global powers have faced this kind of heat, what do you think will be the result in Uganda, given where we are at? Where will Uganda be if this Energy Efficient and Conservation Act is applied or implemented in its full force? That's food for thought for you. That's it for today. Till next time.